Hello and welcome to another episode of Peace and Justice Network's webinar series on human rights, rule of law, and governance in times of COVID. Before moving on to the topic for today, I would like to thank all our viewers and patrons for supporting us in our webinar series. Moving to the topic at hand, which is reducing inequalities, right of minorities, what milestones have been achieved and what are yet to be achieved. Pakistan's constitution allows freedom of religion or belief for minority groups under Article 12. In addition, the country is also bound by numerous international treaties that guarantee and protect the rights and religious liberties of minorities. The government has taken a few positive and welcome initiatives, such as opening the Kartarpur corridor for Sikh pilgrims and the Qatar's Raj Temple complex for Hindu pilgrims. Pakistan's first ever Sikh officer has been posted as Punjab governor's public relation officer. Moreover, members of the Hindu community are joining the Pakistan Army and are posted at key ministries such as Ministry of Defense. Recently, on the directives of the landmark judgment of Honorable Tasadduq Hussain Jalani, on the 5th of May, the government of Pakistan announced the establishment of National Commission for Minorities. Despite these positive measures, there is an urgent and pressing need to institutionalize minority rights by eliminating discriminatory treatment of the religious minorities' revered figures from the national curriculum, implementation of 5% job quota for minorities in letter and spirit. To talk about these and other minority-related issues, we have distinguished panel of experts. Our first guest for today would be joining is Peter Jacobs. He's the Director, Center for Social Justice. He's a research and advocacy organization. Mr. Jacob is also an expert in international law, rural development, and public policy. Welcome to the webinar, sir. Right. We are also joined by Honorable Miss Mary James Gill. She is a politician, a lawyer, and a human rights activist. She was a member of the Provincial Assembly of Punjab from May 2013 to May 2018. Currently, Ms. Gill is serving as Executive Director of Center for Law and Justice, a research-based policy and advocacy organization. Welcome on board, Ms. Gill.
Thank you, Javeria.
And we would be shortly joined by two other distinguished guests, Mr. Krishna Sharma and Mr. Arora. Mr. Krishna Sharma is a minority right leader. He's also associated with District Development Association, Tharparkar. And Mr. Ramesh Singh Arora, he is the member of the Provincial Assembly of the Punjab. He is the first Sikh in 63 years to be elected as member of the Provincial Assembly of Punjab. He has also served as member of the National Commission for Minorities between 2011 and 2013. So, Ms. Gill, we'd first start with you. Can you please elaborate on the challenges faced by minority women in terms of Pakistan, and what policy or legislative measures would you suggest to overcome this?
Thank you, Javeria. Such an important question, which we normally we overlook. When we talk about minorities, we talk about a group of people, and minority women are not even, randomly talked about. But most importantly, when we see women in general in Pakistan, there's so many challenges, and we keep hearing about gender equality and women empowerment. But particularly when it comes to minority women in particular, we do not see anything in place, especially when it comes to personal laws. There's right to inheritance, there's right to divorce, right to maintenance, and more importantly, the right of a registered marriage, which not all minority women enjoy. So this all starts from something when state in general, and governments in particular, they have not been very peculiar about issues of minority women, because they're in double jeopardy, women in general, and when you're coming from a marginalized minority section, a vulnerable group, then of course your issues are, there's an overlapping. But the good news is that for a few years now, there has been some advancement, as you already mentioned. There's some issues already being talked about by the institutions, by some like judiciary has taken some action. Judiciary has been quite vocal about rights of minorities. There has been issue of forced conversion. There has been issue of underage marriage of minority girls, and so is the case of registration of marriages. But I think that there's more needed. Most importantly, when it comes to family laws, because Pakistan is governed under personal laws, we do not have a civil law for every community. Every religious minority has its own personal laws, but we do not have a framework which is in consonance with the international human rights framework. It does not cover the civil and political rights committed under several international covenants. So it's time, when we talk about women in general, we talk about those women who are more marginalized and who still do not enjoy the right of inheritance, who still do not enjoy right of divorce, who do not enjoy the right of having uh, a marriage out of free will and consent. So I think the state institutions and the governments, especially the legislators we have at the moment, and civil society, have been working for a long time on issues of gender equality. I think this segment needs special treatment, and it's not possible until we have a legal and policy framework. We talk about a lot about forced marriages of underage minority girls, but there's no legal framework which covers this issue, and which not only, of course, we talk about child marriage, we talk about, but we see when there is an issue of minority girls, especially Hindu and Christian girls, when they go before the court or they go to the police, the treatment is different. We need to decide either those girls, either they also fall under the definition of child marriage, or either those marriages need to be treated as child marriage, because we see in so many cases, although there are recent encouraging judgments by the Lahore High Court and other lower courts, but there's a lot to be done. And until we have a policy framework, until we have a legislation on it, it's impossible to counter those issues.
We tend to see that those legislations are seldom implemented, and with the with the provinces, with the 18th amendment, the provinces have various definitions of the underage, the age factor of it, and the forced conversions also. So each province is entirely different in terms of that. So how do you think that loophole can be successfully eliminated?
Implementation is always a challenge, but the first step is that you consider it as a social problem, and then you address it with legislation. When state decides that this is to criminalize an offense, considering it's an issue. So far, we are not considering it as an issue, and we have seen that state has, there's not a unified response. Sometimes you see in some cases, if those cases are highlighted by the media, and same goes with where there is communal conflict. Whenever such issue arises, we see that if the police officer is lenient, if he wants to implement rule of law, if they're sensitive enough about these issues, things sort out. But what if there are some extremists or some radical elements in the state institutions, or implementing machinery? What then? So yes, the issue needs to be resolved by the provinces. It's a provincial issue now. But when state as a whole decides and state sees it as a challenge, of course it has a trickle down effect. Every province, despite the fact that Singh tried its best to enforce forced conversions or several other legislations, but we see that they backfired, and they were taken aback. So I think most importantly, when we see that it becomes a problem, and it has an acceptance, and civil society as a whole decides that, all right, this is an issue, but this needs to be redressed. This needs to be institutionalized. I think this is one major step that needs to be taken. We Every time we talk about it, there is a controversy. Police has a different view. Police thinks that, or judiciary has a different view, to be more precise. So it means that there is confusion that needs to be resolved. Until that confusion is there, until we are not sure what we want to do about these girls who are underage and who are converted, or such issue would be keep coming.
I'll move to you now. We tend to see a remnant of colonial era in our legislation, particularly when it comes to minorities. So, these legislations are not kept, abreast of the time, or not updated. So, why do you think that is?
Are you still talking to me? Sorry, I got
Mr.
confused.
Peter, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Javeria, but do you hear me properly?
Yeah, we can. We can. Please proceed.
Okay. Hello, hello, uh, hello. I can't hear you. Cannot hear Javeria.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Ji, did you get the question, sir?
Uh, I thought you were still asking questions on the marriage laws and
No,
the
no,
colonial
no.
legacy.
Yeah, the colonial legacy of, yes, that is the question, sir.
Right. As far as colonial legacy, I mean, that exists everywhere uh, to great extent. But yes, of course, if you're talking about the Christian Marriage Act and the Divorce Act, they are in specifically colonial legacy. Um Hindu marriage law is newly legislated, therefore, you can say this is our own creation. So, to tell you frankly, you see, there has always been need. This need has been responded to some extent, except what Mary has explained in the colonial part in Christian marriage and divorce laws. Um, but generally speaking, I don't see it as a problem. There was never a consensus that we will keep the colonial laws. There was always a critical view on it. So I don't see it as a problem that we should live with, or we should even discuss, because there is nothing that hinders our parliament and us as a society to basically reform those laws. It should not.
Right. And sir, what is your take on the education curriculum that the country has? Because I know you're a proponent and a very hardcore advocate of curriculum being inclusive. So how do you think that can help in acceptance of minority rights in the country?
Okay. Um, if you allow me, I will begin with the general explanation of what equal rights are about, and we how do we count those equalizers,
Ji,
education being one of them.
ji.
So whereas legal parity, legal equality is one, education is other, and the topic that you've chosen, the sustainable development goal, development itself is an equalizer. Whereas I will say that in your topic you have explained very well that there are a few areas we made improvement on, and then there are others which have some challenges. But then there is a third category of the third aspect that we should discuss, and that is the newborn problems. Our system has been so that constant factor of equalizing that exists in education, law, and development uh, have been undermined, have been under threat uh, continuously because of those problems that continue to um, uh, to be generated by the system that we are running and we are living in. So if you recall those recent incidents from Peshawar to Lahore, the legislation done in the a temple in Islamabad and the killing in Peshawar. These are those challenges that keep erupting, keep coming up, and we don't have any control over them. That are third category. Now, if I try to explain how education system has been treating minorities uh, exclusively, or the majority community, majority faith group with preference, then we have made the education system, the entire system, which includes the institutional side of it, infrastructure, its policy, implementation, which includes textbooks also. So textbooks, because they are the most visible part of our education system, we can say that mm, they are replete. They are deplete with so much of hate material, preference for majority religion, and to certain extent, exclusion of minorities. The impact that we see is that a larger part of religious minorities are lagging behind in literacy rates, for instance. In case of Christian community, according to available statistics, they are 11% behind the average literacy rate in Pakistan. In case of Hindus, they are 20% behind the literacy rate. So this is how that um, inequality is reflected and visible in the education sector, or education, the field of education. So, whereas you can count on all those aspects discouraging literacy and excellence in education. I mean, we see a few examples, and you have mentioned in your introduction a few examples, which we should treat as exceptions. I mean, these are exceptionally talented people who, despite of discouragements and inequalities that block their way to progress, to equality, uh, those people have emerged, and we treat them and we admire them uh, as our heroes and people who made difference, people who contribute to diversity, coming from religious minorities. But that is not the case with average minority child or citizen. So education sector, the education policy, curriculum policy particularly, is being reviewed, and we expect that some inclusion will happen. But to tell you that there are a lot of concerns right now, there are a lot of challenges and struggles to engage to actually try to make the education system, curriculum, the textbooks, teacher training, and examination system to be fair to minorities. Sorry, I can't hear you. I stopped speaking uh, a while ago.
Okay. Okay. Sardar Ramesh, can you hear us now? Mr. Ramesh, you need to unmute yourself, please. Okay, so Peter, Mr. Peter, I'll move to you. So, in terms of the
Yes, I
judgment,
can
the
hear.
landmark judgment.
Yes, I can hear you.
Chale. My question would to you, sir, would be, in terms of the Tasaddaq Hussain Jalani's landmark judgment, do you think the commission that has been constituted, do you think it has the capacity to deliver, given the fact it is not considered as very inclusive?
Um, I must clarify that there is an implementation commission that exists, which has been constituted by the Supreme Court of Pakistan. But in the original judgment, the Supreme Court had ordered to constitute a permanent commission on minorities. Um, the government, the previous government and the present government, they have defied the orders basically, and they went on to establish a commission which is non-statutory and which has, in other words, no legal basis. It is only an administrative commission which can be dissolved. If you ask me, we have had such commission in past 30 years, inconclusive. There was never any impact made by those commissions, which were created under different ministries, under the executive orders. So therefore, like we have National Commission for Human Rights, like we have National Commission on Status of Women, like we have Commission on Child Rights, the minorities uh, were not granted a commission which is statutory, has statutory basis. So this commission that was set up um, a month and a half ago, approximately a month and a half, is only administrative commission. Its TORs are very limited, and they do not enjoy powers that a national human rights institution should have. The other three commissions have statutory powers, that is to investigate, to hold inquiries, to punish also, and also to independently uh, review the policies that exist. So in that way, I've been, very um, foremost critic, I must say, and my organizations and many other people who have been criticizing this. We are still expecting that government will soon take up legislation on it and constitute a commission which is, like you said, more representative. It is more autonomous. It is empowered so that we can see an end to the problems that the religious minorities face.
Right, Mr. Ramesh, I'll get back to you. Would you like to add something to this?
Can you hear me?
GG, we can.
Okay, I was, as Mr. Jacob mentioned about.
So we have lost connection with him. So Mary, I'll move to you. Since you have established work on the issue of discrimination in terms of employment of certain minority groups for certain occupations. So can you please explain to us that how come the 5% quota that is in place and that is in that is paid lip service to by the government? So do you think that quota can help somehow, or what are the legislative policies that you think might help in this issue?
Thank you, Javeri. Again, very important question, and we keep, seeing such ads where a certain occupation, and I want to be blunt that when it comes to sanitation work, which is an important work, it should not be considered as a derogatory work, but when it is confined to a certain religious group, it becomes a problem, and especially not it's just a social stigma, but it's also a state, somehow it is a state's policy that whenever you want to recruit people for sanitation work, they should come from certain religious group, a majorly Christian community. It comes in the ad, so I have to be blunt to say that.
No, of course, of course.
But the problem is that it's not overnight, and we have been advocating for that. The stigma is attached. There is shame in this, in profession, and we are just trying to bring dignity to this profession because it's an important work, and no urban life can sustain without, sanitation. But the point is that when and this is what Constitution says. Interestingly, the two times the Constitution uses the word backward minority and backward classes. So we have been trying to to make state officials understand that this is not just minorities you are trying to see from this lens, but it is basically the backwardness that needs to be addressed. And when as you say, reducing inequalities, so when we talk about minorities, it's not a homogeneous group. It's not one group of people coming from different religious faiths or communities, but this group itself has so many inequalities, and these inequalities come from their low socioeconomic status. So as you know, that quotas are affirmative actions. Those are positive discriminations when you want to upbring a community coming from a backward background or a backward class. This is what constitution says. So yes, the quota was an effort, and now we know that it was for the scheduled caste of Pakistan, but it was 11%, but then it was 5% for all religious minorities, mainly. Yes, it has helped a lot, no doubt about it. But we also saw that with this quota, that quota was not sufficient. The quota itself did not help because there was no supply. There were so many. A few years ago, there was a report in the Senate that 70% of jobs, of seats were vacant in federal government on job quota because there were no candidates, there were no qualified candidates. So then we started advocating for education quota. Thankfully, yes, the present government has reserved 2% education quota for higher education. So when we say that we want to bring a backward class to the level where they can compete on merit, or at least where they can have a decent occupation, they can have good places in higher education and high offices, not just in sanitation jobs. So this is I think this is a holistic approach to bring those people who are marginalized or vulnerable and who also happen to come from a certain religious community. So I think this is something which needs to be addressed, and I see it as an issue of inequalities, not just in terms of religion, but also in terms of their low socioeconomic status. Unfortunately, so far, still, it's been long time since I became member of parliament. I have been trying to make people understand, even my colleagues and people in the government, that we need a specific minorities policy. Until we do not, until the state is not sure what they're going to do about this 3 or 4% people who come from different, different faiths, to preserve that diversity, to preserve that, all right, we have a huge percentage of Muslim majority, but those people, those important people, to make Pakistan's image softer and more beautiful, we need to protect them, and we, instead of eroding that diversity, we need to preserve this diversity. Every government has been trying to make certain steps to make this diversity possible, but until we do not have a legal and policy framework that protects them, those judgments or those administrative steps are not sufficient. We need a concrete policy addressing all issues in one.
Right. Siddhartha, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Right. GG, we can. So, in terms of the Sadhu
Sorry,
Hussain,
I'm in the car. That's why maybe some distortion or there's some weak signals. That's why I can't hear you
that's
properly.
okay. That is entirely okay, sir. So, my question to you is that in terms of the Sadhu Hussain Gilani's landmark judgment, do you think that judgment is implemented in letter and spirit, not just in terms of the establishment of the commission, but other, provisions also of it?
Look, Javeria, that was a landmark judgment, and the establishment of this Minority Rights Commission, that was a long-lasting demand of the minority, that there should be a full-fledged commission who would safeguard the minorities' rights, and that's not just an administrative body. They must have some other, like as Mr. Jacob mentioned, three other commissions who who have their own statutory status, and they can call anyone, they can investigate the matter, they can call. But unfortunately, this commission is just an administrative commission. I was part and parcel of this commission in 2011, and I was there for 3 years. So I still remember we recommended so many things, and it went to the government, but there's no implementation. Initially, there was the minister who was the chairman of that commission. Now there's a little bit change. There's a minority guy who is the chairman of that commission, but unfortunately, still that status of commission is not up to the mark, and it's just an administrative body. So execution implementation is the major, would be the major challenge for this commission. So now question arises: either the government is really serious to have a full-fledged commission who have statutory status and they can safeguard, protect the rights of minorities. Otherwise, that landmark mark is just a decision that just a judgment, no implementation by the government. So there is a question on this status of this commission.
And what more do you think the minority groups altogether can do to make this, commission more, more powerful and more, relevant to this
Obviously,
cause?
obviously, until or unless this commission is not powerful, there is no use of this commission. This is just like you can say, you just giving a lollipop to the minorities. Otherwise, there's no need of this commission because we do have a member parliament and they are sitting in the parliaments. They're doing their own legislation, but this commission must be strong enough. And Peter Jacob very clearly talked about the other three commissions. So this should be an independent commission, and it must has a statutory status.
All right. And in terms of the institutions that we see, such as OCAF or this commission also, we see that these are not inclusive. So can these deliver without being inclusive? And what measures do you think you can suggest for it to be more inclusive?
Look, Iveco Trust Property Board is the custodian of Hindu and Sikh shrines. So, but they must be responsible to the commission and the commission because if you remember the last happening of construction of Mandir in Islamabad.
Islamabad.
So there are minorities. There are minorities in Islamabad. There are Sikh community. There are Hindu. There are Christians. There are some other minorities in Islamabad. But we don't have any Gurdwara, and that is the capital territory of the Pakistan. And there are Hindus. So we, according to the citizen of Pakistan and according to the constitution of Pakistan, we do have our worship rights, and we don't have any worship place Islamabad. So I still I was when I was member of this commission. I stood up and talked about the establishment of Gurdwara, and I talked about the Saidpur village. There is a Gurdwara in Saidpur village, and I said that Gurdwara must be functional and it must be handed over to the Sikhs because there's a Gurdwara, and there was a recommendation by the commission. But as long as implementation is concerned, no implementation. That's why Evacuous Property Board must come under the patronage of this status of minority commission. This minority commission. Yes, I agree.
Ri- Right. And in terms of the SDG goals, do you think the current policy measures and legislations are efficient or sufficient enough for Pakistan to achieve SDG goals for reducing
Look,
inequality?
there is always room for improvement. So still need to do a lot. The present happening in Islamabad, and then the present happening in Nankana Sahib, the present happening in Peshawar raises a lots of question on our implementation mechanism. So certainly there's need for improvement, and we need to do a lot because if we are not going to protect the human rights, the minority rights, certainly question will arise up.
Right. Mr. Peter, can you hear us? Hello, Mr. Peter, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Right. So my question to you would be, in terms of making Pakistan a tolerant society, what role do you think the minorities themselves can play? Might you care to answer that?
Sorry, can you
Yeah,
repeat?
Sorry.
I was saying that in terms of making Pakistan a more tolerant society towards, other religious minorities, what role do you think the religious minorities themselves can play?
All right,
All
Peter
right.
Sab is back.
Look, over the
Did you?
decades, the role of religious minorities, a vibrant role, has been reduced, I must say. On the other hand, you see a lot of visibility of religious minorities when they happen to conform to official narrative of the state. So the official narrative has been for a number of decades that minorities are sacred trust of Pakistan and they need to be preserved. Well, only recently this discussion has assumed a new position, and it is talking about parity and equality. And that is why I see the minorities have weakened to the extent that they themselves cannot play a very decisive role. It has to be again the state policies which will have to provide more accommodation, provide more space for minorities in order to even enrich um, their experience of being a citizen in Pakistan. Now, having said that, I must also underline that the question of rights of religious minorities is not a peripheral question. It is not a subservient question. It is the central question of Pakistan's identity and Pakistan's policy. The identity which is created on preference for Muslim citizenship. And our constitution displays those discriminations on the basis of faith and creed, at least at 12 points. It is not just the president and the prime minister whose appointment is reserved for Muslims. There are other discriminations also. Then again, the substantive law also maintains those discriminations. Excuse me. So my assertion is that the question of minorities has been related to the very identity of Pakistan, its name, and the role the state assumes. So, which has a direct influence on our internal and external policies. Those policies ultimately go to create a citizen which is, you can call it a second rate citizen or a citizen which is less preferred. So, how can, in a general environment, the society, a minority can play a vibrant role if they have been assigned a second class citizen, a role of a second class citizen. So that is why my previous point was about the self-generative aspect of intolerance. There is intolerance in the system because of that discrimination division on the basis of religion provided in the constitution and substantive law and policy, which gives way to a social hostility or intolerance against women, sorry, against minorities. For instance, um, wonder if you, by joke even, um, call someone a Hindu, let alone an Ahmadi or something. But these words have been turned into abuses. Even other minorities also, Christians and Sikhs also. So I mean, there is less social acceptance for religious minorities, and that is why I must say that when we start revisiting our policies um, in order to inculcate some equality, we have to consider minorities uh, and their status in Pakistan as a central question related to Pakistan's identity also, which will resolve for us those issues for time to come to to the extent that we will be able to follow. For instance, let me draw your attention. Do I have a minute with me,
Gigi,
Javeria?
please, please. Gigi, you do, of course, sir.
Okay. So just just think of how things happening in Indian occupied Kashmir are happening, and the happenings there have influence in Pakistan. Our discourse against Hindus, against India, not only India but Hindus also get strengthened. Now, the changes happening in Afghanistan, for instance, the Taliban joining the ranks and file of the government will have some, I must say, also negative repercussions that Pakistan will have to face. And oblivious of it, putting everything aside, we create a narrative which is on the basis of religion, very exclusive, which is impacting everyday lives of Muslims and minorities. So, no matter if somebody is killed during the proceeding in the court of law, nothing substantial will happen as a public outcry to condemn this injustice. If the mandir in Islamabad is stopped and the Punjab Assembly keeps on, passing legislation which is derogatory and discriminatory at the same time against minorities, and nobody will speak. So these policies once set, for instance, we're looking at education policy, there is a heavy content based on religion being introduced into curriculum. For instance, we have Islamiyat already. We will have we have Nazira, the subject of Nazira from class 5 to 8, which is again basically Islamic in nature. Then we have the study of Quran from class 1 to 5, which has been made compulsory. And even if we are flexible and we extend it to class 8, spreading the material. It is such a heavy content. It is such a heavy content that you will not be able to tackle the problem of rote learning. The children will have to memorize, and then finally, uh, every parent who can, even with difficulty, afford to send their schools to private schools will send them to private schools rather than sending them to public government-run schools. So the fear is that the new curriculum, with this heavy content of religion, will create that and even enhance the gap between poor and rich. It will impact the class differences negatively, rather than solving any of the problems that we complain about, uh, the 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 existing disparity of opportunities. So opportunities are going to be more available to people who've gone through the private schools, because relatively, yes, they're providing better education than government schools. So those graduates, they will be much more empowered to compete in the world and the market of workplace, rather than the students graduating from government run schools and universities. So I must say that, you see, by creating that this disparity and discrimination for religious minorities, we have corrupted and we have distorted the entire system. If we can get rid of this discrimination on the basis of religion, perhaps we will also add quality and get rid of other discriminations more easily, uh, rather than um, rather than coming it or treating the minorities as one of the issues. It is not one of the issues. It is the central issue of Pakistan's identity, future, and the 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 crafting of policies, the statecraft, basically.
Right, and as you have been rightly pointing out the statecraft, you generally see that minority legislation generally attracts criticism and backlash from obviously the political base of political parties. So how do you think that can be addressed?
It is, you see, because we have in our basic assumption of the law, the constitution, we have said this country is going to have an identity which is complacent to the majority faith. We have accepted that position. So even the people having most extreme views will tend to agree on the constitution. I mean, we use it as a protective mechanism to protect rights because they're given there. But as a what is called is basic structure of, it is yet a debatable thing, basic structure of the constitution. But now that you see one judgment and the Supreme Court of Pakistan has attributed this terminology to the constitution, we can assume that there is a basic structure to the constitution. So the basic structure is somehow again discriminatory. What we call as ideology of Pakistan, uh, even though historically it is much contested concept, we can very well say that that fundamental discrimination is disabling Pakistan's system, and it is disempowering all people of Pakistan. It is in the name of minorities, but it is disabling and disempowering everyone.
Right. So that's
I,
my question to you is, how can local governments be made more inclusive?
Look, in the recent local government act passed by the somebody. Hello, can you hear me?
जी
Can you
जी we
hear
can.
me?
जी we can.
Hello, hello,
जी we can
hello.
hear you, Sardar Sahab. जी we can hear you. Please go on. Mary, I think you'll have to jump in.
All right, very interesting question, Ali. Thank you very much for putting it on. I have been working on it for a while now, and you have rightly pointed out in last elections, we had a big chunk of minority seats allocated in KP and Punjab, and I also did a comparison that those seats were vacant. So, but we tried to figure out what were the reasons, and I think one of the major reasons was that political parties had not done their homework. Either it's AMP, PTI, or PMLN. We saw that when we were drafting Local Government Act 2013, there was one thing we were trying to stress, that the mode of election, what would be the mode of election, which has been a long debate, that what kind of election it should be. But what we did not realize that when we were saying that there should be at least 200 registered votes in one union council so that there could be one minority seat. There was almost there were almost seats in every union council, but unfortunately they were not candidates. It means that political parties had no grassroots connection at in those union councils, especially there were minority concentration was very low. I think this one thing which needs to be addressed. The new local government act, it was more hard in nature, and when Peter Sir was also mentioning that, all right, we are discriminated when it comes to highest public offices like the Prime Minister and the President. Local Government Act also said that there would not be any head of the local government from non-Muslim community. We tried to raise it up, and it was somehow, I don't know whether it was amended or not, but this act was more hardcore in nature, or more exclusive in nature. But as usual, the issue is the same. I think political parties, when it comes to their minority vote bank, they're not very inclusive in nature. That's why local government, which is the lowest and the primary source of, it's a political nursery, we call it. When we do not have any grassroots, uh, union councils are not inclusive in nature, and we also tend to bring people who are either servants of the chairman or people like that. So it becomes somehow impossible to bring people from the religious communities who can actually represent those, in union councils. So I think one way can be that political parties should be somehow make accountable for their representation when it comes to religious minorities. They also do not have very clear policy what they want to do about it. Although every political party has its own manifesto, we see every time in the elections that there is a manifesto to talk about it, but there is no such agenda in any political party's agenda. There is nothing about their effective political participation. Same is the case with the women, but especially for minorities, we see very low representation, even in um, you know. Whether it's a major political parties, executive bodies, or their mainstream wings, there are separate wings for minorities. But we to make local government more inclusive, because political parties have a very major role, and every government holding from a certain political party, it actually represents what they believe in. I think it starts with the political parties themselves, and maybe some changes in the regulations, or some changes in those sections where we require certain number of votes for them, and of course the mode of elections. It will make local government more effective. If the local, the political participation, if it's more inclusive, then of course it will make local governments more inclusive.
Right. So Darshav, can you hear us now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Gigi, the same question to you would be, how can local bodies be made more inclusive?
Look, if you look at the local bodies elections, and I'll second Mary Gill, because political parties, they must need to understand the ground realities. Until or unless you're not going to include the minority groups in the mainstream elections, how can you expect the change would come? Because if you just give them, consider them on the reserve seat, and they're not in the mainstream party, mainstream elections, certainly their existence, their prevalence at the grassroots level, is a big question mark. So if I talk about the present role of minorities in the local body election, still there's that is peanut, and I consider that political parties need to bring all of these minorities in the mainstream. They must contest election on the mainstream elections. Like if there is election for the general council, they must give ticket to them in the general councillor. If he is a member of the district body, you must contest election on the district body. So then you can see there's equality, and people would people then the people has a choice. Otherwise, if you give them just a role on a reserve seat, certainly it would not give a better result. And other thing,
Mr. Peter,
there must be reforms in the political parties. We see there's a body which is called minority wing, and you will see the minority wing is just the minority people are in the minority wings. They're not in the mainstream political parties. So that's why until unless the minorities are not in mainstream political parties, last year I was discussing with some parliamentarians, because when there was 18th amendment, you will see in the whole 18th amendment team there was not a single minority guy. So that's why you will see. Hello.
Gigi, please continue.
That's why you will see in hello.
Gigi, we can hear you, Sardar Sahab. We can hear you, sir. Okay, Peter Sahab, you will have to jump in, please.
Yes. Well, first of all, we must thank Mary Gill and Ramesh for self-criticism that they have they have engaged themselves in, because I mean, they have been to us I mean, better examples, I must say. Mary has been vibrant, and Ramesh has been also vibrant. But when they tried to point out the loopholes and the gaps, it should be considered as self-criticism, which is a healthy thing, I must say. At the same time, you see, looking over the decades, in past 5 decades, we had different modes of representation for minorities. Uh, and the earliest one, which was, in-house election of religious minorities representation, was a pragmatic response, whereas separate electorate is something that really created divisions in the society on the name of religion. It perpetuated marginalization, political marginalization of religious minorities. Now that we see that there is at least a structured and reserved and it is ensured participation. And I quite agree with the panelist that there should be even more a proactive role. But then we should also look at the question whether political participation, uh, it is assumed that our elected houses, parliament, provincial, national, and district level parliaments, they function in an ideal way. Actually, they don't. Sometimes even our parliaments have a very, I must say, symbolic role in legislation. Do you hear me? Sorry, am I fast?
Gigi,
I'm
Gigi, we
hearing
can hear
off
you.
sounds. So, you cannot merely question and analyze the role of representation of religious minorities separate from the parliament itself, separate from the quality of democracy in the country itself. So we have to do that. But in the same vein, I must say that I totally endorse the idea of better, greater, and more impactful, influential participation of religious minorities in the party cadre, the party structure, and the parliament both. Javaria, I cannot hear you for some reason.
Um, G, my question to you was in terms of recommendations, what would you like to say to the policymakers and the statesmen for the betterment of the minority groups in Pakistan?
A way forward has been very well charted out in the judgment given by Supreme Court in 2014. And it is unfortunate that the previous government and the present government keep ignoring this this judgment has never been discussed in any of the cabinets, any of the parliaments, and the implementation is lingering on. So my first recommendation should be that sorry, implementation committee should be set up, particularly for implementation of the judgment given in 2014. You see, we keep going to the court again, and the court has set up this implementation commission, which is headed by Dr. Shoaib Sadal. But I must say that, you see, there is no need of either bench or commission, implementation commission. Permanent commission, of course, it is needed. It is already recommended by the Supreme Court also. So if we have implementation of the law, and for which we need not only the implementation mechanisms, but we also need resources and right will uh, to implement those. So if we can have an implementation committee to implement this overarching judgment which was given 6 years ago, I think much will have we will have achieved much. And of course, there are other initiatives taken, affirmative action. We can admire that, but there is no data, for instance. we to support that that 5% quota has been implemented. So we don't gather. We're very bad at record keeping. It's basically, I mean, the government that we ought to rely. We have to rely on for the statistics. But I mean, these are things. For instance, I will also recommend that the data about minorities from the previous census, which is 2017, should be released without delay. Uh, if there are any gaps, if there are any explanations needed, if there are any policy revisions to be made, I mean, we know this data is embarrassing. It will be an embarrassment for the government or Pakistan to look at those data. But if we can only conclude that this census was a flawed census, then we can at least think about having the next census earlier than 10 years gap. We can have it earlier. We can correct mistakes. We can, if we have true picture of minorities population in Pakistan, that will also help us formulate recommendations for the policies in different fields. Uh, but I think mainly it's the implementation of the judgment itself, and then having our facts right with us, which is with census and other data gathering processes.
Right. So Darsa, what are your recommendations?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
Ji, my question to you was in terms of recommendations to the policymakers and statesmen, what would you like to state to improve the condition of the minorities in Pakistan?
Yeah. Hello.
Ji, we can hear you, sir.
Yeah. Look. Yeah. The recommendation. First of all, the first recommendation would be that is the Sikh Marriage Registration Act. Implementation of Sikh Marriage Registration Act that must be for the policymakers, because if you remember, the Punjab Assembly passed the Sikh Marriage Registration Act in 2018. So far, that act is not implemented yet. The rules of business, they are not. I don't know. They are not drafted or not implemented. But whatsoever, because I have raised this question in the Assembly Forum at the Assembly Forum as well. So Sikh Marriage Registration Act, because we don't have any legal status. As long as the Sikh marriages are concerned, our marriages are not registered anywhere, so they do not have any legal status. So once we do not have any legal status, so certainly after the post marriage, which is the marriage of consent,
Right, Mary, you'll have to jump in again.
Simon again, and maybe again, this is, I would like to stress this again. Once, until we do not have a policy framework, it's been since, Sikh Marriage Act, that was the last legislation after, many decades that we had a legislation related to religious minorities. So there's so many issues, whether it's the implementation of job quota or effective family laws covering or protecting minority women, whether it's education quota or protection of properties, communal issues. So these all issues must be covered under a policy framework so that we can legislate accordingly. Until we do not have that framework, we do not have any institutional mechanism like an autonomous body, maybe a minority rights commission at the federal level and at provincial levels. We cannot think that the state, at least I'm not, confident that the state or the government are interested to resolve those issues we have been talking about for a long time. So for me, the most important thing is that the state functionaries or the policymakers, even the civil society, they must come together to form a policy which caters all these issues. So that whenever there is an issue, we can refer to that vision or that statement of the state, how uh, they will be, taking care of if some such conflict or issue arises. So for me, this is one thing which we can talk time and again, and we can discuss more. We can open a discussion on it. But until this is not part of the discussion, we cannot talk about part of the solution.
And how important do you think state narrative is in this lack of framework?
Absolutely. That's why we see a confusion here. Time and again, there's a confusion. Whenever we talk about, like, let it be the Mandir issue in Islamabad. So whether the state is clear about it, whether our development policies endorse such, initiatives which can make Pakistan look like a more inclusive society, we cannot talk about it. I think whenever such issue comes up, the state has no clear lines. Even political parties are not clear where do they stand. Even the policymakers, before making a statement, that's why we see that there's so much hatred, or there's so much abuse when this is how the public responds, because it sees as these issues can go like this, and nobody's going to take any action against such kind of discrimination or hatred. I think the state's narrative is also, yes, there are positive initiatives like Kartarpur, and there is a judgment, and we can talk about it for another hour. But the problem with the judgments or such decisions is it doesn't talk about state's narrative. It doesn't talk about state's policy. It can be a judgment, it can go away with another judgment. We have seen there are a lot of implementing issues with such kind of decisions. But ultimately, the power lies with the state and the parliament to make an effective policy and legislative, framework to deal with such issues, so that we can go to the public with, yes, the PTAs now, we can see there are SMS that there's a ban on hate speech, but or even on social media, but still we see there's lack of implementing mechanism. We have not so far institutionalized issues of religious minorities. It just comes and goes. We only talk about it when something happens, when media highlights it. Other than that, it's just there's nothing on paper. There's nothing on state's part. That's why there is reluctance, and there's confusion. There is hesitance even from the policymakers and state functionaries at the same time.
Right. Thank you so much. So, for the takeaway from today's webinar is that, according to Mr. Peter, we need implementation committees for implementation of the Sadr Hussain Jalani's judgment, and we need the political will for that. Furthermore, he also brought up the issue of data and statistics on minorities to be updated and released so that this can help in the policy implementation. According to Mr. Arora, Sikh Marriages Registration Act that was propagated in 2018 should be implemented. He also talked about the rule of business that need to be drafted. Moreover, Ms. Mary suggested that we need concrete policy framework for religious minorities, and that we need a federal and provincial level committees for framing of legal frameworks. Thank you so much, panelists, Mr. Peter Jacobs and Ms. Mary, for joining us today. It was a pleasure having both of you, ma'am and sir.
Thank you, Javeria and Peace and Justice Network.
Thank you so much. We're honored to have you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
So that was all from our side today. Before I end this show, I would like to make an important announcement today. From next week, we shall take up the recommendations gleaned from our previous 12 episodes and share those with our viewers. The consolidated recommendations and the subsequent input that we shall get from our expert as well as from the viewers would be presented to relevant state departments for action. PGN shall follow up on these actions also. We would keep you posted on all of this. That was all from our side for today. Do take very good care of yourself, and I'll see you next week, same time. Allah Hafiz.